The wilderness hides something massive and intelligent, a presence that watches from the shadows of the world's most remote places. From a brutal campground massacre deep in the Siberian taiga to a lone fisherman stalked along the mist-shrouded Amazon River, in this video, we'll dive into 6 eerie encounters with a creature that observes, waits, and strikes with unnerving purpose, leaving survivors haunted by the knowledge that they were never truly alone. On August 4th, 2025, a family of 5 pitched their tents near the Aldan River in the Siberian taiga, surrounded by thick forest and endless silence. The parents and their 3 children expected a quiet evening in nature, the sound of flowing water close by and the dense trees forming a wall around their camp. As night descended, the air grew damp and heavy. By 11 p.m., a rolling curtain of fog drifted across the ground, swallowing the firelight and blurring the edges of the camp. The forest grew unnaturally still, each sound muted by the thick mist. It began with vibrations beneath the earth. Heavy thuds broke the silence, growing louder, closer, until the ground trembled with each step. Guttural growls carried through the fog, low and unsettling, shaking the air around the tents. The family stirred in panic as the noises circled them, coming from every direction at once. The sounds were deliberate, as if a presence moved with intent, watching and waiting. Suddenly, the attack erupted. Massive stones crashed down onto the tents, tearing through fabric and smashing poles into splinters. The weight of the boulders crushed the ground beneath them, sending sprays of dirt and grass into the air. Fallen logs followed, hurled with terrifying precision, striking the campsite with such force that belongings scattered in every direction. The tents collapsed instantly, the impact shredding fabric and snapping stakes. The cries of confusion and pain rose above the chaos, muffled quickly by the fog and the crashing of more debris. One by one, the figures inside were struck down, bodies crumpled beneath the brutal weight of impacts, spines twisted unnaturally, collarbones shattered like glass. Deep tears slashed across arms and torsos, wounds so severe that escape was impossible. The attacks came fast, unrelenting, each movement planned, each strike measured. The mist hid the figure responsible, revealing only a towering shape shifting through the pale light. Shoulders broad, movements impossibly fast for its size. The shadow moved with calm precision, circling the camp, closing in on those who tried to flee. By the time silence returned, 4 adults and 1 teenager lay broken among the wreckage. The campfire was extinguished, embers buried beneath dirt and torn branches. Food sat untouched, supplies scattered but not consumed. Gear had been shifted unnaturally, some items stacked in odd places as though arranged with purpose. Footprints, enormous and unmistakably human-like, pressed deep into the earth, circled the camp, and vanished into the dense line of trees. At the forest's edge, a single child wandered, clutching a small blanket. The girl, shaken and pale, stumbled toward safety, the mist swallowing her steps. Behind her, the destroyed campsite stood as a grim reminder of the night's terror, the fog carrying the weight of what had unfolded. The young girl was discovered at dawn by locals who had been drawn to the riverbank by the eerie stillness that hung over the taiga. She was weak, trembling, and still clutching the small blanket that had kept her company through the long night. Her face carried the kind of shock no child should bear, her steps unsteady as she wandered out of the mist. She was the only living witness to the nightmare that had unfolded in the clearing. Behind her, the remains of the campsite told the full story. Authorities reached the site later that morning. What they saw unsettled even the most experienced among them. Tents were nothing more than shredded cloth clinging to bent poles. Chairs lay flattened, broken beneath an unseen weight. Large objects had been rearranged in ways that no storm or animal could explain. coolers, and supplies placed with a precision that suggested intent. The fire pit was cold and lifeless, its ashes scattered neatly across the soil as if extinguished with purpose rather than by chance. Bodies lay across the ground, each marked by violent force. Bones were fractured, some twisted beyond recognition, while deep cuts ran across arms, legs, and torsos. The brutality of the wounds told of immense strength, yet none of the food or supplies had been touched. The lack of scavenging confused the investigators, making it clear that this was not the work of hunger, but something far more deliberate. The child's account of a towering figure moving slowly through the fog matched the scene, though officials chose to ignore it. Reports were filed with explanations that avoided the truth. Authorities wrote of a possible animal attack or natural accident, offering vague answers to a tragedy that could not be explained away so easily. Locals, however, did not accept these claims. They had heard too many old stories of the taiga hiding something massive and cunning. To them, the neatly arranged gear and the untouched supplies were not signs of randomness, but proof of a predator that thought before it struck. Whispers spread quickly through nearby villages. Families spoke in hushed tones about what had happened along the Alden River. Hunters abandoned their routes near the site, and fishermen chose other stretches of water. Parents forbade children from wandering too close to the forest's edge, and dogs barked uneasily at the tree line, refusing to enter the shadows after nightfall. The memory of the massacre carried weight, leaving behind fear that would not fade with time. For the girl who survived, the silence of the forest lingered long after she was taken to safety. Though she had been spared, she carried with her the memory of glowing eyes in the mist and the steady sound of heavy steps circling the tents. The taiga itself seemed to change in the weeks that followed. Birds avoided the area, and game trails grew quiet. The clearing where the family had camped was left untouched, avoided even by those who patrolled the wilderness. It became a place of whispers, a scar on the land, where people said something far older and far stronger had claimed its ground. On October 17, 2018, Private Ethan Cole was stationed with a small unit at a remote training base deep in the Montana pines. That night, the men were ordered to run maneuvers through thick woods, their tents set up near a clearing where the tree line pressed close. The air was cool, the moonlight weak, and every sound carried farther than usual. Around midnight, the silence broke. A low, guttural growl rolled through the forest, followed by heavy thuds that shook the ground. The noises seemed to circle them, moving with speed but never coming directly into view. The soldiers froze, listening as the sounds grew closer. Branches snapped sharply, echoing through the dark, while the heavy steps shifted from one side of the camp to the other. The growls deepened, rough and uneven, vibrating against their chests. The pressure of being surrounded built with every second until the attack came without warning. The walls of their tents collapsed under crushing force, poles snapping, fabric ripping as though torn by claws. Their gear was flung across the clearing, canteens and packs scattering into the dirt, yet nothing was taken. It was destruction for its own sake, violent but controlled. In the chaos, Cole caught a glimpse of what haunted the night. A massive, broad-shouldered figure moved swiftly between the trees, its size greater than any man. The pale moonlight lit its shape for only a moment, enough to show its towering form as it passed through the mist. Despite its size, it moved with startling agility, weaving between trunks as if it had run these woods for centuries. Every motion was deliberate, circling the men without closing the distance. Rifles cracked through the night as the unit fired into the shadows. Muzzle flashes lit the clearing, but each bullet vanished into the forest, hitting nothing but wood and dirt. The towering shape slipped away without sound, its heavy presence vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The growls ceased, the ground stopped trembling, and the men were left staring into a forest that now looked empty but felt alive with hidden eyes. When dawn came, the damage was clear. The torn remains of tents lay across the clearing, their fabric shredded beyond repair. Metal canteens lay dented, packs ripped open but not looted, and rations scattered yet untouched. The fire pit had been buried under overturned soil, smothered without flame. The strangest sign lay in the dirt itself. Around the camp stretched a ring of impressions, each shaped like a human foot, but more than 2 feet long, pressed deep into the soft ground. The trail of tracks circled the area and then vanished into the forest, as if swallowed by the earth itself. Cole stood staring at the marks, unease pressing into him with the weight of truth. Something had tested them in the night, something larger, faster, and more intelligent than anything he had faced in uniform. Cole could not shake the memory of those enormous tracks circling the ruined camp. Every detail of the night clung to him, sharper than any training exercise or battlefield drill he had known. The quiet after the attack felt more dangerous than the attack itself, as if the figure had chosen not to finish what it began. That thought followed him into the days that came after, casting a heavy weight over his mind. When he reported the incident, superiors noted his account, but treated it as the result of exhaustion and stress. They wrote the destruction off as the work of wildlife, dismissing the footprints as distorted impressions left by boots in soft soil. To Cole, the explanations felt shallow. He had seen the towering shape, the deliberate movement, the strange choice to destroy without stealing. He knew what he had witnessed was no bear, no prank, no accident. The others in his unit avoided speaking about it, but their faces told the same story. They carried the same haunted look, the same restless silence, yet none of them pushed against the official version. Cole alone could not let it go. In the weeks that followed, he became withdrawn, his eyes scanning the tree line even in daylight. Sleep came rarely, broken by sudden jolts awake as if the ground were trembling beneath him again. His unease grew so heavy that he quietly requested to leave the service. On paper, it was voluntary, but those who knew him understood it was more than that. He could not reconcile what he had experienced with the silence forced upon it. The discharge was granted, and with it came distance from the woods that had scarred him. But distance did not bring peace. Friends noticed the change in him almost immediately. Once steady and sure, he now startled at small sound, avoided conversations about his past, and carried a constant edge of tension in his shoulders. He walked as though always expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Fellow soldiers who had been with him that night described him as pale and hyper-alert, a man unable to forget. Stories began to spread in whispers. Though officials had buried the event under reports of wild animals, the account passed quietly from one barracks to another. Soldiers spoke of guttural growls that circled a camp, of tents crushed by unseen force, of a massive presence that moved through trees without sound. Some believed, others laughed it off, but the story lived on. It grew into something more than a memory. It became a warning. The pine forests of Montana already held a reputation for being vast and unforgiving, but after that night, they gained a darker edge. Locals told each other to avoid remote clearing, to respect the silence when it fell too deep, to trust their instinct when unease pressed on their chest. Cole's unit never returned to that exact site, and even years later, the men avoided speaking of it openly. For Cole, the shadows of those woods never faded. The image of a broad figure slipping between the trees remained carved in his mind, proof that something immense and intelligent had chosen to test them before vanishing into the wilderness. On October 9, 2014, Derek Lawson, a seasoned hunter, pushed deep into the Wind River Range of Wyoming. He carried with him years of skill and caution, yet the forest he entered was vast and unpredictable. The peaks loomed above, sharp against the fading autumn light, and the woods spread endlessly in dark stretches of pine and brush. He made camp near a clearing, preparing for another long day in the wilderness. His rifle rested against a tree trunk, a steady companion, while firewood lay nearby in small, organized piles. The camp seemed peaceful, But the silence that settled over the area carried a weight that was unusual even for remote country. As night fell, the quiet deepened, broken only by the faint snap of twigs beneath unseen weight. The forest appeared to be watching, every shadow alive with threat. When searchers later arrived, they found the campsite preserved in an unsettling state, as though a presence had moved through deliberately but without disorder. Firewood had been spread out with strange precision, and Derek's belongings, including a backpack and water bottle, had been taken uphill and stacked neatly as if arranged by unseen hand. Closer to the trees, the ground bore chilling signs. Massive impressions pressed into the earth stretched nearly 2 feet from heel to toe. The prints formed circles around the camp, weaving through the brush in deliberate loop before vanishing into the undergrowth without warning. Broken branches and crushed shrubs marked a path of heavy passage, twisting through the forest in unnatural pattern. Nothing in the area suggested a struggle. No blood or torn fabric, no drag marks or clawed remain. Yet Derek was gone. The search team moved carefully through the wood, but the deeper they went, the stranger the atmosphere became. Stillness pressed on them, heavy and unnatural, as though every living creature had retreated. Only the faint roll of guttural sounds carried through the trees, too deep and resonant to be wind. Each sound rose in the distance, spreading through the valleys and making the men pause, uncertain of their sort. Authorities documented the case with little detail, attributing his disappearance to cold night, disorientation, or simple exposure. But those who scoured the range knew the evidence did not fit. A man as experienced as Derek would not leave a rifle untouched, nor would he abandon supplies so carefully ordered. What stood out most was not what was missing, but what was left behind. The camp intact, the signs of movement deliberate, the environment manipulated in ways no storm or ordinary predator could achieve. By the time the official report was closed, whispers had already spread. Locals spoke of something vast and patient, a figure that did not feed on livestock or steal food, but instead studied its prey with precision. Hunters avoided the stretch where the tracks had been found, and those who passed through at dusk described the same suffocating hush and the same sensation of unseen eyes following them. Derek Lawson was never found, and the forest gained a legend that has never faded. The search teams who had combed the valleys returned unsettled, describing the same crushing stillness that had marked the night of his disappearance. Birds were absent, streams ran without sound, and the ordinary rhythm of the wild seemed muted, as though the land itself held its breath. Even the dogs brought into track could not hold their focus, circling in confusion, whining, and refusing to move further into the brush where the impressions had vanished. Weeks after, reports circulated of strange formations near the ridge. Travelers described gear arranged in neat stacks, as though unseen hands had carried items only to display them. Branches had been bent and locked together, forming arches across game trails. Stones were placed in deliberate shape, circles and lines that served no clear purpose, but carried an unsettling suggestion of intent. Some speculated that these were markers left by other wanderers, but none could explain the size of the impressions that had been recorded beside them. Locals soon avoided the stretch of range where the camp had been discovered. Hunters who once treated the wilderness as familiar ground began to speak in hushed tone, warning newcomers not to remain overnight. They described hearing heavy steps beyond sight and a sound that rolled like thunder low in the chest of the forest. On quiet evenings, families claimed to hear the echo of guttural cries traveling across valleys, fading only when night deepened. Authorities, pressed for answers, maintained their explanation that Derek had succumbed to exposure, perhaps losing his way or injured in terrain too difficult to search fully. Yet even some within the investigation admitted quietly that the arrangement of belongings and the precise circling track did not fit the ordinary pattern of a lost hunter. Nothing had been stolen. No scavenger had touched the camp, and the footprints that ended abruptly at the brush line were unlike any known animal in the region. For the Lawson family, the absence weighed heavily. Without a body, closure never came, and the questions only grew with each retelling of the story. Friends described him as cautious, experienced, and careful with every step in the wild. That such a man could vanish without a trace left behind spoke not of accident, but of an encounter that defied explanation. Over the years, the Wind River Range gained a reputation as a place where something vast lingered beyond human reach. Stories passed through campfires and taverns of figures glimpsed between trees, broad silhouettes moving with impossible silence. Some said the wilderness itself hid an ancient predator, one that studied rather than hunted outright, leaving behind arrangements as if to remind those who entered that they were being observed. To this day, hikers tread carefully near the place where the prints had been recorded. Few dare to stay after dusk, and those who do often speak of a chill that settles as the sun dips behind the peak. Derek's disappearance remains one of the unsolved mysteries of Wyoming, his last camp preserved in memory as proof that something massive and intelligent still moves in the hidden reaches of the range. On November 12, 2018, Marcus Hayes drove his heavy truck through the Yukon under skies so dark they seemed endless. The highway cut through miles of frozen land, the silence broken only by the hum of tires on ice. It was a lonely stretch, where pine forest pressed against both sides of the road, the trees tall and shadowed by thick fog rolling low. Marcus had taken this route many times before, but this night felt different. The stillness was heavier, and the air carried an edge of unease. Without warning, something massive slammed into the cab with terrifying force. The rig rocked violently from the impact, metal groaning as though struck by a freight hammer. Marcus clutched the wheel, his heart hammering in his chest, fighting to keep control as the trailer swayed across the icy stretch. For a split second, he thought of a bear, but the blow had been sharp and calculated, not the blind rush of an animal. As he pulled to the shoulder, the violence continued. A roar, guttural and deafening, tore through the night air, vibrating in his bones. The mirror on the side of the cab exploded in shards, the glass spraying across the road. Deep gouges ripped across the door, claw-shaped but far too wide and long to belong to anything ordinary. The trucker's eyes darted into the fog. For a breathless moment, he saw it, a figure towering above, shoulders broad, moving on two legs with unnatural speed. It matched his truck stride for stride, pacing beside the cab as though it owned the road. Its bulk was immense, its shape alive with power, and its glowing eyes cut through the darkness. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished back into the dense line of trees, swallowed by mist. Marcus sat frozen, unable to trust what he had just witnessed. The forest seemed alive with sound, branches snapping, gravel scattering, stones shifting under heavy weight. When he dared look toward the roadside, his blood ran cold. Rocks and gravel had been pushed into deliberate shape, stacked and lined like markers, not scattered by chance. The careful order in such chaos only deepened the terror. Instinct took over. He slammed the accelerator, the wheels screeching against the icy surface. The truck fishtailed, then surged forward, the engine roaring as he sped away from the scene. Behind him, the growl still echoed, rolling out of the trees, following him long after the figure itself had disappeared. He did not stop until he reached a distant checkpoint hours later, nerves shaking, hands locked tight around the wheel. When investigators returned to the stretch of road, no signs of bear or moose could be found. Instead, the soil held chilling evidence. Massive human-shaped prints, each more than 2 feet long, pressed into the ground before disappearing into the thick timberline. The investigators studied the site, but their reports offered little certainty. They noted the absence of animal traces, the lack of blood, and the strange piles of gravel arranged with care. To the officials, the event could not be explained, yet they quietly filed it as an accident, citing icy roads and fatigue. For those who saw the impressions, however, the explanation failed to make sense. Marcus remained shaken long after. He could not forget the sound of the roar, nor the image of the figure keeping pace with his rig. Nights became restless, the memory replaying each time he closed his eyes. He had driven thousands of miles across the northern wilderness, through storms and snow, yet nothing had unnerved him like that night. He refused to take the same route again, requesting assignments that kept him far from the forested highway. Word spread quickly among drivers who passed through the Yukon. Rest stops filled with stories of shadows moving alongside headlights, of sudden crashes against trailers with no animal to blame, and of shapes glimpsed in mirrors vanishing before the eyes could adjust. The tale of the collision became another warning, one that kept some travelers away from the road after dusk. Local residents added their own accounts. Hunters whispered of guttural cries rolling through the valleys when the fog thickened. Families living near the tree line reported stone formations appearing overnight on their property, patterns too deliberate to be random. Some believed the structures marked territory, left as silent messages for those who strayed too close. Others said it was proof of a mind at work, one that studied humans without revealing itself fully. Despite the official dismissal, the evidence never faded. The size of the footprints, the scratches across the cab, and the violent force of the strike pointed to something far larger than any known creature in the north. The way the truck had been marked, the mirror shattered, and the door scored seemed less like an animal defending itself and more like a warning delivered with intent. For Marcus, the memory grew heavier with time. He no longer spoke of the night openly, but those who knew him saw the change. He carried himself with caution, his eyes scanning tree lines whenever he drove remote roads. Each journey into wilderness reminded him of the presence he had faced, a presence that had chosen not to finish what it began. The thought that it had tested him and then disappeared left him more unsettled than any attack could. The Yukon Highway remains a place of unease for those who know the story. The fog that drapes over the road still carries whispers of something vast, hidden just beyond sight. Travelers who brave the stretch often return with the same feeling, a sense of being watched, of something pacing unseen through the dark, intelligent and waiting. The night Marcus Hayes endured became one more mark in the long, growing list of encounters that suggest the forests hold far more than silence. On July 18, 2014, Rosa Nalu, a ranger in the Baining Mountains of Papua New Guinea, set out to patrol deep jungle paths known for hidden hunting camps. The air was thick, the canopy heavy, and each step sank into soft ground where roots twisted underfoot. Her duty that night was to track signs of poachers, but the forest had grown strangely quiet. Even the insects, always loud and constant, seemed to hush as the shadows lengthened. As hours passed, the silence broke only with faint static from her radio. Distorted bursts of sound came through, uneven and unnatural, almost as if something interfered with the signal. The device crackled again and again, and though she tried to clear the channel, only harsh bursts and strange echoes filled the air. The interruption brought a sense of being followed, of unseen movement moving with her, but never revealing itself. Close to midnight, violent sounds shattered the stillness. Heavy impacts struck nearby trees, and the undergrowth shook with frightening weight. Rosa turned quickly, but all she saw were moving shadows darting between trunks, vast and fast. The growls that followed were guttural, low, and unlike any animal known to the region. The force of the sounds pressed against her chest, as though the jungle itself carried them. Her tent and gear were struck soon after. The canvas rattled, the ground shook with thuds, and the air filled with the smell of damp earth torn apart. She tried to defend herself, but the blows came too swiftly. Deep scratches tore across her back as she was dragged over uneven ground, branches cutting her skin while stones bruised her body. She struggled, but was thrown down again, her ribs breaking under the pressure of an unseen weight. The attack was calculated, not random. Her belongings, radio, map, and medical kit, were lifted and placed carefully on a fallen trunk, arranged in a way that suggested intent rather than chance. Around the grove, vines were twisted into knots, branches bent into strange stacks, and pieces of foliage placed in unnatural patterns. It looked less like chaos and more like a message, though its meaning remained hidden. By dawn, the patrol team set out to locate her after failed responses through the radio. They found her body in the grove, marked with lacerations across her back, ribs fractured, and bruises covering her sides. The signs of dragging showed she had been pulled across uneven ground before being left in the open. Close by, enormous human-like prints, more than 2 feet long, circled the site before disappearing into dense thickets. The scene carried a presence that chilled even the most experienced trackers. Nothing had been eaten, nothing taken, and yet the destruction carried purpose. Rosa's life ended in the silence of the Baining jungle, the evidence around her suggesting that something massive and intelligent had chosen to strike with deliberate force. The evidence left in the grove brought fear not only to the search team, but also to those who later reviewed the scene. The unusual arrangement of Rosa's belongings made investigators uneasy, as if the act had been done with patience and awareness. The twisted vines and stacked branches could not be explained by wind or chance. It was as though something had marked the ground deliberately, leaving behind a silent message. Authorities filed their report quickly, choosing to call the tragedy the work of wild animals or a possible accident. They could not accept the idea of something else moving in the jungle, something that studied and struck with intent. Official records did not mention the strange footprints, nor the organized patterns surrounding the grove. For the families of rangers and the locals who lived near the mountains, this silence deepened the unease. Rosa's loss carried weight across the region. She had been known as strong and capable, someone who understood the dangers of the wilderness. For her to fall in such a way meant that what had attacked her was not only powerful, but also unlike anything encountered before. The fear spread quickly through nearby villages, where stories had long been told of shadowy figures walking upright between trees, vanishing before they could be followed. Other rangers grew cautious, patrols were shortened, and some refused to enter the deeper areas of the forest at night. Radios that once offered comfort now seemed reminders of the strange static that had preceded her final moments. Reports of faint growls and heavy thuds in distant clearings began to increase, though none dared stay long enough to trace the sounds. Hunters and gatherers avoided the dense sections of the mountains, leaving parts of the land untouched. The attack also created a lasting scar in the local memory. Families spoke of the patterns left in the grove, the way gear had been handled as if placed by human hands. The footprints haunted many who saw them, too wide and too long to belong to ordinary men. They appeared to start and stop at random, as if the being that made them could vanish into the jungle without leaving a path. The sense of being watched became part of daily life for those who lived near the range. Travelers described unease as they crossed narrow trails, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against their backs. Farmers claimed to find stones stacked carefully at the edges of their land, structures that had not been there the day before. No clear proof tied these events together, yet the shadow of Rosa's end lingered. In the years after, the Baining Mountains grew more feared than before. People spoke softly of the presence that had taken her life, a presence that left no clear trace yet revealed its power in deliberate ways. The jungle, already known for its secrets, gained a new reputation, a place where something vast and intelligent moved silently, studying humans, waiting, and leaving behind only fragments of its existence. On September 12, 2011, fisherman Carlos Menezes set up camp along a secluded branch of the Amazon River. He had spent the day casting nets, and had gathered a full catch, dozens of fish and several turtles that he planned to bring home at dawn. As night fell, the mist thickened over the water, curling low and heavy, swallowing sound until even the calls of birds and insects seemed distant. Alone on the bank, he stoked a small fire, the smoke rising faintly into the humid night. Through the darkness, only the soft drip of water from leaves reached his ears. Hours passed in silence. He checked his nets again before resting, seeing them stretched along the bank, full of life, ready for the next day. But something shifted in the stillness. The mist seemed to carry movement, as though shapes flickered beyond the trees, careful not to step too close. His radio and lantern remained untouched, yet he felt the strange sense of being observed. When morning came, the sight that met him left his chest tight with dread. Every fish, every turtle had disappeared. His nets lay neatly coiled and arranged upon the sand, not torn, not scattered, but folded as though placed by unseen hands. The precision of the arrangement made the loss even more chilling, as though someone, or something, had judged his work and chosen to take it without damaging the tools. The mud along the bank revealed disturbing evidence. Imprints stretched deeper than any human weight, over 2 feet in length, with toes shaped in a way no shoe could copy. The tracks led from the edge of the river into the undergrowth, before stopping abruptly, vanishing as if the maker had melted into the jungle itself. Flattened brush and snapped branches formed a rough, winding trail, curving deliberately around his tent and fire, showing a path of careful movement. Carlos froze as he turned toward the trees. In the haze, a colossal figure stood between the trunks, towering, shoulders broad, form covered in shadows. It did not move, only watched him, still as stone, yet filled with a presence that felt heavier than the air itself. His body tensed, heart pounding, and though no strike came, the pressure of its gaze was enough to send him into hurried action. He packed as quickly as his shaking hands allowed, fumbling with his gear, eyes darting back to the forest again and again. The shape remained for moments, then slipped away into the mist, vanishing without sound. He launched his small boat, paddling with desperate speed downstream, never daring to look back. By the time he reached a village farther along the river, he was pale and exhausted, unable to explain fully what had happened. The jungle had given him nothing to carry home, only fear carved deep into his memory, and the certainty that the riverside was not his alone that night. The village where Carlos arrived was used to strange stories, but his condition carried weight. His hands trembled, his clothes clung with sweat, and his words stumbled as he tried to explain the disappearance of his catch. Neighbors noticed his fear and spread it among themselves. Soon, whispers of what he had seen traveled quickly along the river. The sight of the enormous figure and the vanishing of the fish became a subject of worry among fishermen who relied on the waters for survival. When others went to examine the camp later, they found the marks he had described. The prints pressed deep into the mud, longer than the length of a man's arm, each one distinct and heavy. The path of flattened plants stretched in an unnatural curve, as if the being had wanted its movements to be noticed. The neatly arranged nets on the bank gave the scene an even more unsettling feeling, for no wild creature known to the Amazon showed such care with human objects. The officials who visited the area wrote short reports, calling the event a theft by people hiding in the forest. Yet the size of the imprints and the sheer weight in them contradicted such claims. Hunters who compared the markings to those of jaguars, tapirs, or even large snakes knew instantly these did not belong to any common species. What unsettled them more was how the tracks stopped suddenly at the line of dense trees, leaving no further trail to follow. In the weeks that followed, stories multiplied. Some fishermen swore they heard guttural sounds along the water at night, low and echoing, always just far enough to be hidden. Others said they saw stacks of stones near their camps in the morning, though none remembered building them. Many avoided the smaller tributaries after dark, leaving stretches of river empty that had once been busy with boats and nets. Carlos never returned to the same site. The memory of the towering shape in the mist weighed on him, a reminder that he had been watched while he slept. He spoke little of it afterward, but his absence from the deeper waters told its own story. His silence became part of the warning told by elders who advised younger men to respect the unseen watcher of the riverbanks. Years later, the tale of the stolen catch remained alive in villages along the basin. People recalled the organized nets, the huge tracks, and the figure that observed without striking. It was not seen as a random attack, but as a test, a reminder of something vast and hidden that claimed parts of the jungle as its own. Each retelling added to the belief that the Amazon, already full of dangers, also held an intelligence that moved silently, taking only what it wanted and leaving humans shaken but alive. The rivers continued to run, but fear lingered with every splash at night, as if the unseen thief still waited beyond the mist.